All right, so welcome back, everyone, and welcome back, Scott. We'll continue with our geeking out and talking on the intersection between psychotherapy and awakening, enlightenment, processing trauma, repression. So you coined this term recently, the inside-out path. And realizing that that's what you have been developing. You have been inspired to develop this new way of approaching suffering. So could you, in a nutshell, or even bigger than a nutshell, a whole tree, a whole apple, explain somehow, what would be the essential criteria of, or some of the essential factors of an inside-out path?
What comes to mind for some reason while you were saying that is, okay, so if the research is right, the trauma keeps the score, the body keeps the score. Why would we wait until the end of the path to learn what the score is? That's one way of saying it. If it's true that the body actually keeps the score, why do we wait till the end? Because usually in the spiritual path, the embodiment process is somewhere at the end, if it happens at all. But that's what's keeping all the score on the suffering. Why are we doing that last? So the basic idea behind inside out is, can we learn what's going on in the hidden unconscious body early, the programming in there, so that when our different forms of suffering come up, we can take inquiry to the root of the suffering. Instead of because I think on the outside in path, what I notice when I say outside in, it's basically any path that doesn't put the body first in the path, that leaves it as a mystery, and then the suffering comes, and then at some point we might learn what it is. Here, when you learn early, you don't have the shock. I feel like we're taking some of the shock away from suffering, because I was shocked to have a 3-year sex addiction after the awakening. That's shocking. Where does that come from? Or cancer, 3 years after the awakening, I get diagnosed with cancer. And not that we could prevent that necessarily, but it's not as shocking if you understand that you have repression, and the science says that repression leads to cancer, and that you could actually, inquire on those issues from the beginning of your path, instead of getting shocked by a diagnosis and having to reverse engineer like I did. I had to reverse engineer everything that happened to me and discover it. Now that we've reverse engineered it, why can't we just put it all on the table and say, look, this is the stuff in our bodies. If we don't wait to reverse engineer it in the end, we become proactive in the beginning to learn what it is. We might be, first of all, less shocked by the suffering that comes up, because we might understand it more and have more insight as to how to inquire into it, because we understand where it's coming from. So that's the basic idea of it. And then we break that down into practice.
So addressing the real root cause, or going where the real suffering is from the beginning, and which is in the body. And maybe there are some new people hearing us. We're not talking about in some medical way, or some doing energy work, or doing some Reiki. So we are going more like to, I guess, in the old school path is that they say the core of suffering, the root of suffering is the sense of separation. The root of suffering is the misidentification of myself as the body, or as the mind, or various lofty concepts like that, which are true. But you are saying to don't leave it like that, and go a little deeper and more specific.
Yeah, I mean, here's a metaphor that's very easy to understand. If we sat with a flower or a weed in a garden, and we sit there and said, well, this is something this is creating suffering, so we're going to pull it. Oh, it's gone. But then it grows back, and we sit here and we go, oh, that's interesting. It keeps coming back. So we just keep pulling it and pulling it, thinking that's the answer. At a certain point, we're going to realize it has roots in the ground, and that we have to get into the ground. And if we go into the ground early, we don't have to experience the root coming back as often, because we're going to the root early.
Yeah.
That's one way. Now, turn that to the body. If we're here doing spirituality, but we're ignoring what's underground, and then that's producing suffering. Now, from the inside out path is to go underground from the beginning and get to the roots of that, is one way of saying.
Yeah, yeah. So here we have this map and the 3 dimensions, like mapping the what's on top of the ground, you know, the what we can see, and then the second dimension is like what's a little bit underneath. Like,
Okay, I'm sorry, Mihai, I didn't really answer your question before you say that, because
yeah,
I meant to also say that what's on the surface feels like the identity. That's what, like a lot of what we're dealing with, even though it's still unconscious, that we deal with in spirituality is still to me just the weed flower. So that identity has roots in the body, is what we've learned. Like the identity of I'm not good enough isn't just happening in awareness as a disconnected thing. It's totally rooted in the body into emotional repression and other things. So that's the equivalent of the, I wanted to say that metaphor
yeah,
is like it really roots down there
yeah, yeah,
to the identity itself.
yeah, yeah. Actually, I haven't told you, but I was having one of my meetings, and then somebody who is doing KI asked me a few weeks ago, asked me about this sense of I don't belong. You know, I don't belong. Some sense of aloneness, and I don't fit. So she asked me about this, and then I was answering intellectually, philosophically, different options. You know, hey, it could be that this is a deficiency story, and you felt like this in childhood. That's a sense of identity. Or it could be that you recently moved here in a rural area and you don't have friends and you're isolated, and you got to do something about it, and it's probably both. And she was like, okay, that's interesting, thank you. She comes next time, and I ask her, how's it going with I don't belong? And she said, you know what, I went into 3rd dimension with that one, with doing repression and going underneath the I don't belong identity, and she kind of regressed into the past. And then she started to bring to awareness and stir, which was already there, like hurt, sadness, fear that she felt a lot in childhood. She did it quite a bit. So she went away from even I don't belong and all of that. She went to where the fuel was. And she reported to me that, you know, I don't have it anymore. I don't feel it so much anymore. And so there was interesting verification of what you are saying, going to
Yeah.
the roots and almost like not worrying about the flower, studying the flower and all of that.
Yeah, I think that's been an interesting thing is watching people report that their identity, the suffering of their identity is going down without having to really focus on it that much, which is interesting because normally
Yeah,
in non we have to focus right on who am I, like to get that down. But by getting to the roots, the flower doesn't grow. The
yeah,
wheat just doesn't grow in the same way or it stops growing. And it's
yeah.
a roundabout way of getting to the real core of it.
Yeah, I was observing this in myself with this. I have this comes when about to go in close relationships. And as we know, close relationships are evoking the file of my how I felt with my family. It comes this mysterious no. So this is the flowers are like, I don't know. Yeah, but going underneath, it's like I'm afraid. There's some fear about something. And then if I go a little bit underneath, it's like it says, well, I'm going to be stuck. I'm stuck. I'm going to be trapped and stuck. And then I used to land there, as you call it. I used to take that, okay, well, I'm going to be stuck. I don't want to be stuck and I'm trapped. So anyway, lately I've been going underneath that. Like, well, what's that supposed to mean? Trapped
Yeah,
and stuck.
right.
And so then it brought my family of origin, and so that's how the child was feeling a lot. And even that's not a feeling. So I went to, you know, I'm afraid. I was afraid. I was angry. I couldn't be myself. I couldn't be free because I'm afraid and this or that. So I'm
Yeah,
now, yeah, not. I'm kind of using those key landing words, identity, as you call it, to
yeah.
go to the origin, follow the scent of the
Yeah,
suffering.
another way to say it, because there are people that are interested in like Buddhism and, you know, non-duality, is that life is flow. It's like emotions are just coming and going, thoughts are going constantly, but we try to make an identity out of some of it because some of it well, this goes deep because uh, there's the contraction, first of all. Okay, let's just put that to the side for a second. There's buried emotion that is a form of a contraction, which feels permanent. You have to admit that. Like it feels like I've always had this, I'm always going to have it. Like, so the impermanence doesn't fit in that because it feels like we're making identity out of it, right?
Yeah.
Here's where I think it's being made of. It's like the identity comes up. Whenever the identity is there, it's actually a pointer to the repression, just like you're saying. It's a pointer right to it because the identity seems to be there because we're not allowing some emotion. So we're not seeing the impermanence of life. There's some anger and we're holding on to it. We create this sort of permanent self out of it. Like, and then here comes the identity. So I can't open to hurt. And then I have to have an identity because that identity protects me from feeling that. And then I am someone. There's my identity. I want to keep coming back to that because it's safer. That keeps the energy from flowing. So that's where you can link up the identity with the energy flow and just the non-dual piece that everything is in flow. Everything is naturally in flow. Everything is impermanent. We're unconsciously trying to make identities around emotions that we can't allow flow with. Now, here's the thing I have to say is that a lot of people already understand that, but with only regard to what's conscious. So they're sitting with contractions and they're watching flow on top of it. So safer emotions are coming up. Like if I bury anger, if I get triggered, I'm not going to feel the anger. It's going to be the contraction. That's not going to flow. So there's going to be a lot of flow on top of it, like stories that I can see and allow, or safer emotions like sadness can be allowed. There can be flow in all of that. But the anger will not flow in that by just letting it be. So what we're doing really is we're, as you know, pulling up the conditioning that won't allow that emotion to flow. And that's really, really unconscious. So I just don't want people to mishear this, is why I'm saying this, because what we're not saying is just rest and let everything flow through because it doesn't flow. There's an element of our experience that is we're holding on to it. That's the repression. That creates the identities. So the identities become a pointer to the repression.
Yeah.
And that's contraction. So that's not something that's just going to flow easily. I want to make sure that people understand that. Like just because you now know that the contraction is repression, by knowing that it doesn't move it, and by resting with it, it normally doesn't move it very well. There's a mind part of it that has to be made conscious. As you know.
Yeah, so you are saying so this contraction and they talk in, I guess in the Adida teaching, this self-contraction. Yeah, very common, self-contraction, the separate self. You are saying, or we are discovering that it's physical and it's emotional, it's mental, energetic. And so in order to relax that, first of all, we can't force it to relax because it's been like this for a long time and it was a function, but to start making the mental aspect of it conscious. And it says something like, don't trust, to get away from me, don't let anybody see you. So we make conscious the mental aspect, and then we make conscious the emotional aspect in that contraction. And it starts to gradually open more. But at the same time, there's this element of awareness, right? We haven't mentioned awareness, but this is an awareness-based kind of modality. So somehow that's the light, basically. Like the light needs to see the mental aspect, the emotional aspect,
Yeah, exactly. But the another thing there, as you know, is the mental aspect that we're talking about is really buried. So there's the mental aspect. So there's the mental aspect of identity that comes up. But I feel that's still on the surface because that's there because of the repression. So we want to go deeper than just I'm stuck or I'm wrong or I'm bad or I'm a victim, as we know.
Yeah.
Because if we go down to the roots, to the deeper, more unconscious conditioning that we drum up, which would be like, I'm afraid. I'm angry, I'm hurt, but I can't express it, or some fear, some really deep emotional thing.
Yeah.
That's what I think gets to the identity better. So I say that because I can see that people would listen to this video and then start working with these contractions, but not get to that conditioning. See,
Yeah.
they would
Yeah.
just be spinning and the identities keep coming up. Every time an identity comes up, what I tell people now is, you're safe. If you can see it that way, you're safe there. Even though there's a lot of suffering in the identity, you don't have to feel the rage or the buried hurt. So what you're doing is you're spinning your wheels in something that is safe. See?
Yeah.
And so that's
Yeah.
the right there, is because we're putting too much focus on something that's safe and we're not getting to the thing that isn't, that we don't want to feel. And that's why a lot of people are experiencing the identity that keeps coming back, I think.
Mhm.
A lot of people, or if they put the identity to rest somehow, then the disease comes in, you know, because there's some conditioning that we're not getting to, I think.
Yeah. 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 Thanks for making the clarification with the mental, because we are talking about making the mental aspect of the contraction conscious. So it's not the regular mental realm that says, like, for instance, oh, I don't know if monogamous relationship are right for me. I don't know. I'm not sure if, you know, so this kind of confusion or debates at the mental level, but at the level of contraction, the mental voice of the contraction is I'm afraid, don't get close.
I'm
Don't try.
angry, I'm hurt, whatever that child body.
Yeah. So this is what at the level of these commands, nervous system commands. So there's there's a mental aspect of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is good that we started it this way, because we talk about inside out, then that applies to every form of suffering. So if the audience can hear what we're saying, is that we're cautioning against too much processing of surface stuff. Certain things should be, but when you're ready, you can go to the somatic with the third dimension KI and get to the roots of it in all forms of suffering, just in the way that we talked about. So in other words, when the form of suffering comes up, KI teaches you how to get to the buried unconscious conditioning around the trauma and repression. So that's important. But
Yeah.
now the inside out path means that we bring that to all forms of suffering. So it's not just like a trigger or a deficiency story, but it would be like if there's a shadow or chronic pain or symptoms of a disease
Mhm.
or any form of suffering, if it's linked already to the repression and trauma, what we do is we bring that into practice, all those areas of suffering, then we bring it back to to that deep conditioning that we're talking about. We link it up in all those areas.
Yeah. Yeah.
To the extent we can, you know, because there's a great resistance to that at first.
Yeah. Yeah. So you are saying you suggest people to develop the skills and the ability and the confidence and the knowledge to go to the root of the unconscious early on, no matter what the suffering is. Yeah, could be addiction, could be lack of self-worth, could be anxiety, depression, um, unawakened recurring triggers to just go to the core soon.